Regardless of what you hear, the cost has to be absorbed by farmers who, with some exceptions, are price takers in the market. They are not able to pass the costs along by charging higher prices for their products. Try to sell your wheat to Cargill and ask for a little bit more for a bushel of wheat because you had to spend a bit more drying it. So for a number of farmers, the cost comes right off the bottom line. What about the cost to the environment? Agriculture accounts for 73 megatonnes of GHG emissions nationally. Heating fuel, according to Government of Canada statistics, represents 1.7% of that, or 1.2 megatonnes of GHG. Now, some of this heating fuel stuff occurs in backstop provinces, and some is probably heating fuel that's not part of the grain dryer farm building issue, but let's say a megatonne of emissions per year. Now, as senators have said, the carbon tax doesn't eliminate these emissions, it incentivizes changes in behaviour to reduce emissions. How much will that incentive be? Well, it's hard to tell. One, in fact, this is the only empirical example I could find, is from Ecofiscal Canada, an organization advocating for carbon pricing. They estimate that after 10 years of a carbon tax on gasoline in British Columbia, gas consumption declined 7%. Now, incentivizing a carbon-based energy reduction in grain drying is a bit trickier, and in farm buildings as well, but let's say it's going to happen at that rate, or even double. The effect, well, optimistically, after 10 years of carbon price incentive, we could expect a 10, maybe 20% drop in CO2 emissions, maybe 0.2 megatonnes. Let's put this in perspective. Canada's overall goal to drop GHG emissions by 2050 is up 250 megatonnes. So this issue is at most 1,000th of the issue. We should put it in perspective. Here's another way of looking at it. The Government of Canada, my government, is planting 2 billion trees this decade. A great incentive, I think. It was to contribute 11 to 12 megatonnes of CO2 savings toward our target. How are we doing? Well, so poorly that the Environment Commissioner reported late last spring and testified before our committee that we will fall 7 to 8 megatonnes short. That shortfall represents fully 3 or more % of our total goal nationally in every respect for 2050, somewhere between 30 and 50 times the issue we're talking about today. So I think if we really were serious about this, we'd be talking about the bigger issues in our own backyard. So this bill produces a modest, very modest setback to the climate change goal, I would acknowledge, and a modest benefit for farmers. In the context of Canada and agriculture, though, certain industries, and I think this is one, face greater vulnerabilities than others. Indeed, the exemption provided for farm fuel is a perfect example of that. And since the objective of exempting farm fuel is to enable agricultural production to occur without excessive burdens, this is a minor additional contribution to that. The government itself has recognized that going forward, agriculture and agri-food will be one of a small number of pillars of the Canadian economy. A report that was led by Senator Harder made the same point. Whether we think of agriculture as a line of work for Canadians, as a way of feeding Canadians, or a way of feeding the world, or a way of selling product into the world to generate foreign exchange, the importance of agriculture to the country's future cannot be underestimated. And it levels the playing field in relation to our agriculture competitors in a minor way, I admit, including the United States. Finally, let me come to what I will call a nation-building perspective. I'm nearly done, Madam Speaker. I fear that Bill C-234 has taken on a symbolic meaning in some respects, well beyond its actual practical effects, and I hope I've made that point. Part of this line of argument seems to engage the urban-rural divide in this country, and to some extent, this debate hasn't helped. Part of it is interpreted as a political tension regarding the degree to which the Government of Canada respects the interests of the West, particularly the prairies. A little ironic, since nearly two-thirds of the benefit here is going to go to Ontario. Admittedly, there are tension points in the country, and we should be attentive to trying to address them constructively. It's not a sole compelling reason for supporting C-234 in its original form, but it is a factor. A year or two ago, I quoted a decision in an important case in the Supreme Court of Canada, probably the most important case the Supreme Court of Canada ever decided. In speaking about the very nature of Canada, a unanimous court wrote the following, and I quote, "A nation is built when the communities that comprise it make commitments to it, when they forego choices and opportunities on behalf of a nation, when the communities that comprise it make compromises, when they offer each other guarantees, when they make transfers, and perhaps most pointedly, when they receive from others the benefits of national solidarity. The threads of 1,000 acts of accommodation are the fabric of a nation. The threads of 1,000 acts of accommodation are the fabric of a nation. The accommodation in Bill C-234 is one such thread." Thank you.
It's up to the Senate now.